Hello. I ended the last lecture referring to um, the growth of towns and cities throughout the Roman Empire, reflecting the sense of fundamental importance of urban living to the Roman sense of culture and civilization, right? What then about the city of Rome, right? So the textbook actually gives us a brief summary of what Rome is like at, say, during the period after Caesar Augustus becomes the first true Roman emperor, and during that 200-year period, Rome is going to grow to be a metropolitan center of over 1 million inhabitants. That touches on what we had spoken about before with the growth of the latifundium system, the slave run plantations that begin to dominate the agricultural landscape. And when it moves up into the Italian peninsula itself, and these wealthy Roman elite families begin taking advantage of the collapse of the economy for the freeholders, they will go in and buy up these lands. When they do, they are effectively forcing these people off the land, or they're just leaving the land and going to the city because they can't continue to live in the rural landscape because of the events that we've described already, right? Nevertheless, the text says that, look, um, Rome is the center of the empire. Think of that expression, all roads lead to Rome, right? So all of the wealth and the power centers on the city of Rome. So to be an inhabitant of Rome um, meant that you had certain privileges that couldn't be guaranteed elsewhere, right? And so effectively, the emperor's power and the state's wealth, they're going to work to guarantee, first of all, a basic food supply. There's a document written by Caesar Augustus at the end of his life where he describes on several occasions how he would step up to feed the population of Rome by going out, buying out of his own resources millions of bushels of wheat that he would bring in and distribute to people at large, so that the emperor then, who's the emperor of all Romans, must ensure that his core population in the city of Rome is not starving. So he will definitely ensure, he and others following him will definitely work to ensure that there is an adequate food supply for the people there. Rome then had, over the centuries, built a water system centered on the aqueducts. And these are going to spread through other parts of it. Segovia, a rather nice mid-sized city set in a rural landscape, to somewhat to the north of Madrid, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a while since I've been there. Has a marvelous Roman aqueduct, runs right through the center of town, and in the center of town, which is the low point, that is probably about 10 stories high. It's a really impressive structure that carries water to the city of Segovia even today. If you can imagine that, right? A structure that's over 2,000 years old is still up and functioning today. So there were, for the city of Rome and its inhabitants, 13 working aqueducts. And an aqueduct can go miles up into the mountains to reach its source of water for the city to ensure it. And of course, it was a strategically radically important element there, right? The supply of water, the population of it, right? Of people in the town itself, right? Nevertheless, the textbook goes on to say that with all of this, with the idea that living in Rome can provide you with certain privileges and benefits that others might not have, the living conditions are, in the words of the textbook, appalling. And then people who visited Rome at the time, because the class structure of Rome was divided between the extremely wealthy members of the elite classes in Rome and the commoners who have come in and who are being housed in these multi-story tenements that are prone to fires, can collapse in any kind of an earthquake, are dangerous, simply dangerous and overly crowded structures. Certainly a place where disease can fester, right? And indeed, Rome in the lower classes is a disease-ridden society, a city with a great deal of disease. It also has a high rate of crime and violence in it, particularly in the poorer sections of town. Now, Rome has managed to build a truly marvelous sewage and drainage system in the city. Nonetheless, sanitary conditions were extremely, let's just say they were far from perfect, and sort of helped feed the spread of disease in the town itself, right? In fact, the number of people who would die from diseases was such that every year, several 100,000 people would have to move into the cities to sustain its population at the same level. So many people had either moved out or had died in the meantime, as an indication of what it was like. But remember, all roads lead to Rome. It is indeed the very center of the Roman universe. Okay, so city of Rome also has, because of its massive size, it's probably the largest city on the planet at the time, has systems of mass entertainment. First being theaters. So there were several theaters, very much like in Greece, often open air with a stage. People could sit in chairs that had been built into the hills around it. And just like in Greece, there would be plays put on. So there were Greek and Roman plays that were put on. There were Roman playwrights. There were dances, music events, other kind of popular events that would take place in these theaters. Then what has possibly become more famous, more sort of emblematic of Rome itself, the amphitheaters that were built, and certainly Rome's amphitheater, the Colosseum, is the very symbol of a period in Rome after Christ and the period after Christ, in which Rome has become a megapolis, this huge city for its time. And this is part of sort of how you appease the common masses whose lives are far from perfect, who are struggling, but who wish to benefit from living in Rome. And we'll see how the events there will feed into the whole patronage system that has emerged there, right? So The Colosseum in Rome was really, as the book states, a state-of-the-art development. It was really an extraordinary place. It's shaped more like this, and indeed, when they'd have the races on chariots that would run around it, it was designed for a variety of events. Believe it or not, they could flood the arena and have actual naval battles fought there. They would recreate naval battles. Sometimes they didn't turn out quite the way they were supposed to. Who was supposed to win historically doesn't win because these are wild and woolly kinds of confrontations, right? They can empty it out and then release wild animals there and have people out there going hunting against lions and tigers, other kinds of wild animals. They also sponsored gladiatorial games, the gladiators, the Roman gladiators, many of whom were slaves, had been captured in war, brought back, and given the chance to fight for their lives in the arena. They'd be given equipment and training and things like that. Men would then face off against each other. We know that with the rise of Christianity and the persecution of Christians, things would happen there with, fill the stadium with Romans and then feed the Christians to the lions, to the applause of the gathered masses. Okay, now I mentioned patrons. What are the social relations then inside a place like Rome, or indeed inside the larger context of the Roman Empire? Because where Rome goes, Rome influences the social relations. Patrons, what are patrons? With the collapse of the Senate as an agency working to defend the situation of the underclasses in the Roman Empire, individuals turned to wealthy and powerful people to create patron-client relationships, where the patron is the wealthy and powerful person who can use his or indeed her influence in your behalf, either directly by providing you with money or food if you need it. The client then is a person who is dependent on the patron, but also to a certain extent sort of pledges loyalty to that person. Their family will be there to help them, right? In the case of riots and things like that, they'll stand up and defend them, whatever, right? So we have this sort of reciprocal relation, which the textbook is going to suggest actually gets embedded into legal definitions of the relationship between the client and the patron, what the patron's responsibilities are, and reciprocally what the responsibilities are, so that this becomes part of the legal system in Rome, and the Roman legal system is one of the truly impressive aspects of Roman society written large. When you dig down into Roman civil society, we see that the formal relations between individuals are strictly governed by Rome's laws and system of courts. Indeed, Rome, the Roman state's own legal system will become a complex legal system with a body, a corpus of written laws that are tied to institutions that grow up around this system of law and order in Roman society, designed to settle disputes between individuals and containing, what we see in our own society, where we have, the law as a prominent field of study and a field of endeavor for individuals who are educated and trained in the laws and who then, for a price, will go into the courts and defend people in front of the legal system itself, right? The laws themselves will, and the book doesn't do as much as it might have with this because the growth and development of the legal system in Rome represents the response of Rome, a small city state that grows over time, incorporates large numbers of people, and has to rule those people. And so the Roman system of law evolves into what is truly a universal system of jurisprudence that, facts before the law, doesn't make any difference whether you were ethnically Roman or not, right? These kinds of things. It should equally defend the rights of all facing the law. Paul, the so-called 13th apostle, when he was arrested, said, "Take me to Rome. I'm a Roman citizen. I wish to, be seen in that context, right? As a reflection of the respect that someone like that had for Rome jurisprudence, and the system that it develops. That indeed will be one of the things that, with the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, will continue to exist afterwards and indeed will be resurrected at the point of the Renaissance as a reflection of the contributions of the past. But that's centuries in the making, right? When you look specifically at Roman society itself, it is the family that is seen as the fundamental basic unit of society. And indeed, within the family, then, it is the persona of the pater familias, the father of the family, who indeed is seen as being the ruler within the family, having power over all of the dependents, his dependents within the family, meaning his wife, his children, any slaves that are part of the family as well, right? And so he has jurisdiction legally over them. Indeed, when we look at even further into the nature of Roman society, this promotion of the family is also given priority through the process of the census that we've been through it ourselves, and in the Roman census, then the basic unit is the family, and this prioritizes the legal and social importance of the family in terms of assigning an identity to the individual based on what family he is from. This would make it appear, these elements, that women have little or no power. The text does sort of give us some examples, right? There's a primary source reading, women inviting other women to a party, that women indeed did have a degree of freedom of action, and they could own and control property, even though there is this pater familias legal status. Women, particularly women of higher social classes, could exercise a degree of wealth and influence in society. All right, let's see. So we have this. We have towns, cities. Now we're going to see how this is sort of developed into a sort of a mini global economy, which creates an economy of scale. That indeed Rome is able to incorporate the surrounding areas and effectively bring them into this, not only them, but the resources that they have, their labor power, but also different forms of resources. So the first thing the text talks about is um, metals, strategic metals, things like gold and silver, iron, other kinds of strategic metals. And in the classical world, as we have already seen with the figure of Hannibal, the Carthaginians get involved in Spain in the mining of strategic minerals in Spain, and it's from there that Hannibal will lead his army of elephants around and invade the Italian peninsula itself. Well, once Rome takes over the circum-Mediterranean, Spain then becomes a major target for these kinds of things. And indeed, size and the level of the size and the level of mining that went on in Spain was rather impressive. Indeed, they have discovered what they believe are residues of, because they'd have smelting areas where they took the metals and they smelted it, and apparently so much went into the atmosphere and eventually rained down on the ices in the north, in northern Finland and up into the Arctic region, where they've gone in and dug out ice cores and said, oh, wow, look at this that represents the impact of events in Spain on the ice thousands of miles away. Okay, so let's see. All of this, of course, is related to the demand for metal in the empire at large, and leading to the growth of these massive mining operations in Spain. Now, this will then feed into the growth of coinage. And so coinage is what we would call today currency, the currency of the realm, so that it is metal coins that constitutes the money of exchange that we have at the time. And so this then is being fed then by the mining of gold and silver in Spain that is then being brought back and minted into coins. And of course, the introduction of coinage into the economy radically facilitates the exchange of commodities in the marketplace. Buying and selling things in the marketplace is much easier when you have coins, particularly with coins that have standard values attached to them by the state. Okay, so also coins then establish a currency that enables the state to assess taxes in terms of coins, and indeed taxes will primarily be collected in terms of coins, money, and of course that's much easier to transport and throughout. So all of this is growing the economy and the interchange of parts of it. Archaeology, and we've spoken a little bit about archaeology. There's a subfield of archaeology which is underwater archaeology, where you put on the mask and you have a tank and you go down and you and today there are, the people that do that will be out with boats that have sonar that can sort of see imagery on the bottom of the sea. And what they're looking for are shipwrecks. And indeed, within the last 30 or 40 years, we have, they have discovered and gone down and analyzed shipwrecks in the Mediterranean region and get this idea of how massive the trade that occurred throughout the Mediterranean was, right? One ship that went down directly to the bottom had huge ceramic basins sealed with wax that contained olives in olive oil that were still edible when it was taken up. Other things that they discovered were being shipped back and forth through it, so that that battle between Rome and Carthage for the control of Sicily, which is going to make Rome a maritime power, truly gets converted into this idea of the Mediterranean as Mare Nostrum, Mare Sea, Nostrum R, Nuestro Mar in Spanish, right? Mare Nostrum, or sea, that the Romans invested time and energy in ensuring that pirates weren't there. Ships could move back and forth, transport materials back and forth. And indeed, with all of these systems, Rome had ports would sort of collect taxes on items coming in. And so all of that would feed it. And so the Romans had converted the Mediterranean into this great shipping lane, if you will. But they certainly didn't stop there. And as did the Assyrians, as did the Persians, especially the Persians, they built roads. And of course, the Romans will inherit some of the roads of the Persians and the Assyrians, but they will then build their own, right? And so the expression, all roads lead to Rome, reflects not just the fact that Rome was the cosmopolitan center of this immense empire, but indeed Rome built roads that are still up and running today. In Paris, several of the major bridges over Paris that are being used by 18-wheelers today were built by the Romans 2,000 years ago. I'd be driving around in Spain and suddenly I'd go over a big gully and I go, wow, that bridge. And I'd stop and I'd look, it would be a Roman bridge with the Roman arch, with the stones placed up to hold this. And I'm going, are you kidding me, right? This bridge has been out here in the middle of nowhere for 2,000 years, because when the Romans built, they built to last. Probably their greatest attribute was that as architects, they did build structures that were designed to last. Hell, the Colosseum would still be around today if Romans hadn't come in and stripped the marble off it and things like that to put on their own homes to once Rome was no longer Rome and in control of things in the way that it had, right? Now, in terms of the mines and in terms of the plantations, what we see here is the emergence of chattel slavery, which means that chattel slavery refers to a system of slavery in which human beings have been converted into commodities that can be brought into the marketplace and sold as that. When I buy them, they are my private property. I can do with them as I will. And the chattel slave business in Rome will be tied to the mines, which is always physically exhausting, dangerous kind of work, or work in the plantations, right, which is also exhausting in the hot sun. Both of those are the two key areas in which slaves are used. One thing the chapter adds that I would like to mention as an anthropologist, I teach another course, IDS 220, uh, and in that course, I use a book called Victims of Progress, which looks at the um, destruction of tribal societies around the world over the last period of several hundred years. Um, and one of the things it looks at is the imposition of sort of our way of life, our doing things, our relationship to the environment, and how that is different from how tribal peoples relate to the environment. So the textbook suggests that the extension of the concept and indeed practice of private property to regions with no prior experience of it, that is, of a sense of private property, that I can put a fence around a piece of land and I have the right of exclusion, because that's at the heart of private property. I can determine who may enter the land and who may not, a right of exclusion, private property, right? The book then suggests that this is one of the most enduring effects of the Roman Empire and its spread to so many different parts of the world, where people are now introduced to the concept of private property. Rome, in the year 410, will be overrun, the city of Rome will be overrun by foreign armies, specifically a combined force of Goths, German speakers from Central Europe, Goths, and there were two of them, Visigoths, who are the Western Goths, and the Ostrogoths, who are the Eastern Goths. Both of whom have been driven out by the Huns, who had attacked the Great Wall of China and been repulsed by the armies of the Chinese. The Goths then will come in and overwhelm the Roman forces, penetrate down across what would be Germany and France, then penetrating into both Spain and Italy. And Rome cannot resist them. And Rome, for the first time in 800 years, since the Gauls, is conquered by an outside army. Several Roman generals had brought their armies into Rome, in a sense, but this is the first time in 800 years that outsiders have managed to do it. They were able to fend off Hannibal, who came close, but this is the first time. The institution of the Roman Emperor will limp along till 476, when the last Roman emperor is removed. At that point in time, then, German culture, written large, in terms of Germanic kingship and stuff like that, right, which will help create feudalism in Europe, sort of destroys much of what Rome had put together over 800 years. And when we look at what remains, I like to see that, say 410 as a barrier between the Rome that was and what it passes into the future. And we've just seen the text referring to the concept of private property. But I think there are probably some other things that should be mentioned. First is language. The language of Rome was Latin, and it spread with the Romans all around. But Latin over time deteriorated into what are today the so-called Romance languages. And it's not because they're romantic, although it might seem that way. French and Italian, no. Je t'aime, okay, in French. Ti amo, mi amore, okay, in Italian. But that's not what it's all about. It's that they are derived from Latin, which was the language of Rome. So that's one of the legacies of the Roman Empire. The other is something that we mentioned already, that legal system that will survive in certain areas to reappear, and will be part of that continuous growth of a universal legal system that will confront the Germanic system that is much more, the Germanic legal system is much more tribal and local and this kind of a thing, right? And the third thing is Christianity. Your textbook has, right at the end of the piece on the Roman Empire, a interesting piece about Christianity, which I think is worth reading. It sort of gives you a different perspective of Christianity as a religion in the flow of the Roman Empire, one religion amongst others with specific elements to it. But of course, Christianity will be one of the factors, the cultural factors of Roman civilization that indeed is able to survive for 10 and will gradually penetrate the Germanic masses, converting them over time. A figure like St. Patrick, okay, in Ireland, was actually the son of a Roman official who was kidnapped from the coast of England, brought over to Ireland, spent 12 years, something like that there, came back, was able to escape, came back home, and then eventually went back to convert the Irish. And when he went there, he helped develop what were called scriptoria in the monasteries, to have them copy works of classical literature. But he converted them to Christianity. 200 years later, the Irish will then come back and help establish Christianity in parts of Europe that had remained pagan in the hands of the Germanic masses. The next thing we're going to be looking at is the growth and development in China of a major civilization that will sit on one side while Rome is on the other of the Eurasian landmass, and sort of creating these two massive, huge societies, both of which are fundamentally based on warfare and the ability to conquer and control, but then develop aspects of civilization within them as they rule over the centuries. Okay, thank you. Enjoy yourselves.